Having spent most of my life watching markets rise and fall, governments stumble and recover, and businesses tested by forces far bigger than their balance sheets, I can say for a fact that every now and then something happens that even money can't solve. And right now, that's what we're seeing in New York. A court ruling has drawn a hard line through Donald Trump's business empire. And whether you follow politics or not, this one concerns everyone, because behind the headlines is a test of something deeper. The idea that business law and leadership still answer to rules. You see, this isn't just a legal decision. It's a moment when the foundations of accountability are being measured, and the outcome could reverberate far beyond one man or one company. Now, I've seen a lot of cases come and go over the decades. Some stick with you, some don't. But this one, well, it's got elements that make you sit up and pay attention. Not because of the politics, frankly. I try to stay out of that as much as I can. But because of what it says about how we value things, how we present them, and what happens when those two don't line up. The case began when New York's Attorney General Letitia James accused Donald Trump and his company of inflating asset values to secure better loans and insurance terms. Now, let me tell you something. In business, valuation is part art, part science. Always has been. You've got appraisers, you've got market conditions, you've got comparable sales, and then you've got what somebody's willing to believe. But there's a line, there's optimism, and then there's, well, let's just say creative accounting. After years of filings and court hearings, and believe me, years is the operative word here. These things don't move fast. The trial court ruled in 2024 that the Trump Organization and its executives had committed persistent fraud. Not a one-time mistake, mind you. Persistent. That word matters. It suggests a pattern, a habit, something that wasn't just an oopsie on one Tuesday afternoon. The court ordered them to pay over $450 million in discouragement. Now, that's a word you don't hear every day at the dinner table, but it's important. Disgorgement isn't a fine exactly. It's not punishment in the traditional sense. What it is the court saying, you made money you shouldn't have made, and now we're taking it back. It's money meant to strip away what the court saw as ill-gotten gains. The idea is simple. You don't get to keep the fruits of fraud, even if you've already spent them, invested them, or tucked them away somewhere, $450 million. Let that sink in for a moment. That's not pocket change, even for someone like Trump. That's real money. The kind of money that changes how a business operates, what it can do, where it can go. And alongside that financial penalty, something else happened that's just as significant, maybe more so in the long run. A financial monitor was appointed. Now, this isn't like having an accountant drop by once a year to check your books. This is someone whose job is to be inside the organization to oversee the company's transactions day to day, to review its records in real time, and to flag any irregularities before they happen. Think of it like having a referee living in your house, watching every move, every decision, every deal. It's intrusive by design. It has to be. What the court was essentially saying is this: we don't trust you to police yourselves anymore. So we're putting someone in there to do it for you. And that kind of oversight, well, it changes everything. It changes how deals get done, how fast decisions can be made, how flexible you can be in responding to market conditions. When you've got someone looking over your shoulder who has to sign off on things, your whole rhythm changes. Now, I want you to think about what led to all this, because it's instructive. The allegations centered around financial statements, specifically statements of financial condition that were provided to banks and insurance companies. These statements showed what Trump's assets were worth. And according to the Attorney General, those values were, let's say, generous. For example, there was Trump Tower, beautiful building right in Manhattan. The organization valued it at a certain price based on treating the retail and commercial space as if there were no restrictions on how it could be used. But there were restrictions, significant ones, the kind that would matter to any serious appraiser or lender. If you tell someone your property is worth X, but you leave out the part where it can't actually be used the way that valuation assumes, well, that's a problem. Or take Mar-a-Lago down in Palm Beach. Gorgeous property, historic, exclusive, The organization valued it as if it could be sold as a private residence to anyone with enough money. But there's a deed restriction on that property. It's supposed to be used as a club, not a private home. That restriction changes the value significantly if you're presenting it one way to get favorable loan terms. But the reality is different. Again, that's a problem. And this wasn't just about one or two properties. The pattern, according to the court, was widespread. Golf courses, office buildings, estates, all valued in ways that the court found to be materially misleading, not just optimistic. Misleading. Here's what gets me, and what should get anyone who cares about markets and capitalism. Banks and insurance companies rely on accurate information. That's the whole game. They're making decisions about interest rates, about loan amounts, about coverage limits based on the numbers you give them. If those numbers are inflated, they're taking on risk they didn't sign up for. And if enough people do that, if it becomes normal to just, juice the numbers a bit because everyone does it, well, that's how trust breaks down. That's how markets stop working. I've always believed that capitalism works best when it's transparent, when people can trust the information they're getting. Charlie Murray used to say, God rest his soul, that a reputation takes a lifetime to build and 5 minutes to destroy. And he was right. The moment lenders start to think they can't trust your financials, everything changes. Your borrowing costs go up, your options narrow, your flexibility disappears. Now, Trump's legal team has argued, and they've got a point worth considering, that the banks did their own due diligence. They didn't just take the statements at face value. They had their own appraisers, their own analysts, their own risk models, and nobody lost money on these loans. Every loan was repaid. Nobody defaulted. So where's the harm? It's a fair question. Actually, in my world, in investing, if everybody makes money and nobody gets hurt, well, usually that's called a good deal. But the court saw it differently. The court said that even if the banks weren't harmed, even if they made their interest payments and got their principal back, the law was still violated. Because fraud isn't just about whether someone loses money. It's about whether you told the truth. It's about the integrity of the information you put out into the world. You know what? I think there's something to that, because if we start saying, well, nobody got hurt, so no harm, no foul, then where does it end? Do we wait until somebody does get hurt? Do we wait until a bank does lose money? Until an insurance company can't pay claims? Until the whole thing unravels? Or do we draw the line before that happens? The court drew the line, and now we're watching what happens next, because this isn't over, not by a long shot. There are appeals pending. There are arguments about whether the monitor is necessary, whether the penalty is too harsh, whether the whole thing is politically motivated. All of that will play out in the courts over the coming months and years. But here's what I'm watching, and what you should watch too. How does this affect trust in the system? Does it make people more confident that the rules apply to everyone? Or does it make them cynical, thinking it's all just politics? Because at the end of the day, markets run on trust, democracy runs on trust, business runs on trust, and when that trust starts to erode, well, that's when things get really expensive. Not just in dollars, but in something much harder to measure and much harder to get back. Then in August 2025, the appeals court stepped in. And, I thought, well, maybe this is where things get dialed back a bit. Courts do that sometimes. They look at a penalty and say, all right, that's a little much. And that's exactly what happened. The appeals court said the fine was excessive and struck it down. $450, million gone, poof, just like that. Now, you might think that's the end of the story. Trump wins. The company breathes a sigh of relief. Everybody moves on. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets interesting. The appeals court did not lift the finding of fraud. Let me say that again, because it matters. They threw out the penalty, but they kept the verdict. The fraud finding stood. And you know what else stayed? The restrictions, the oversight, the monitor, all of it remained in place. So in simple terms, and I always try to keep things simple because that's when you really understand what's going on. The penalty disappeared, but the control did not. The money went away, but the leash stayed on. And that's the part investors and observers often miss, because we tend to focus on the dollar amounts. We see 450 million and our eyes get big, and then we see it get reversed and we think, oh, they won. But did they? Because when a business loses its autonomy, even temporarily, it's not just about dollars. It's about governance. It's about who makes the decisions. It's about velocity, how fast you can move when opportunity knocks or when trouble comes call. The company can keep its name. It can keep its buildings. It can keep doing business. But someone else now has a say in how it moves, spends, and grows. And in my experience, and I've got a fair bit of it, that changes everything. Everything. When a court appoints a financial monitor, it isn't just a symbolic gesture. It's not like getting a slap on the wrist or having to write an apology letter. This is real. This has teeth. It means that before any large transaction, any asset sale, or any major financing, an independent overseer must review, approve it. Must, not should, not might. Must. The March 2024 order outlined that this monitor would oversee financial transfers, corporate restructuring, and new debt issuance. Now, think about what that means in practical terms. Let's say you spot an opportunity. A property comes on the market. Perfect location, great price, but you've got to move fast because there are other biters. In a normal situation, you make the call, you move, you win or you lose, but it's your decision. With a monitor in place, you got to explain it, document it, wait for approval, and by the time all that happens, well, the opportunity might be gone. Someone else swooped in. That's the cost of oversight that doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but it's real, very real. In practical terms, that's almost like handing your car keys to someone else while still sitting in the driver's seat. You may still own the vehicle. It's got your name on the title. You're making the payments, but you no longer decide where it goes or how fast it moves. You can suggest, you can argue your case, but ultimately someone else has veto power, and that changes the whole dynamic. I've run Berkshire Hathaway for decades now, and one of the things I've always valued most is autonomy. Not because I want to do whatever I please, though that's nice, I'll admit, but because in business, speed matters, flexibility matters. When we see something we like, we can move. When we see trouble, we can pivot. We don't have to ask permission from a dozen committees or wait for some overseer to sign off. And that autonomy, that freedom to act, it's worth more than people realize. In business, control is everything. I mean that everything. You can have the best assets in the world, the best brand, the best locations, but if you can't control how they're used, if you can't make decisions about them freely, then what do you really have? You've got a trophy, maybe something pretty to look at, but you don't have a business you can steer. Once management loses autonomy, uncertainty begins to creep in. And let me tell you something about uncertainty. Investors hate it, hate it. They can deal with risk you can measure price plan for, but uncertainty about who's really in charge, about whether decisions will get made or get stuck in some approval process. That's different. That's toxic to valuations. And investors hate uncertain governance because it muddies the line between accountability and responsibility. If something goes wrong, whose fault is it? Management, who proposed the action, or the monitor, who approved it? If an opportunity is missed, who dropped the ball? Did management not move fast enough, or did the oversight process slow things down? These aren't theoretical questions. They matter to anyone thinking about investing in, lending to, or doing business with an organization under this kind of supervision. This wasn't just a fine or a sanction. And believe me, I understand fines. You pay them, you learn from them, you move on. This was different. This was an active intervention in how a private company operates. The court essentially said, we're not just going to punish you for what you did. We're going to change how you do business going forward. That's a different animal entirely. And here's something else to chew on. That kind of arrangement is rare even in heavily regulated industries. I mean, think about it. Banks are heavily regulated. They've got the Fed watching them, the FDIC, the OC, all these alphabet soup agencies. But even banks, once they're up and running, don't typically have someone sitting inside the company approving every major decision. They've got rules to follow. Sure, regulations, capital requirements, stress tests, but day-to-day operations, that's still management's call. This situation is more intrusive than that. This is someone inside the tent looking at everything with the power to say no, and it's not temporary in the way a fine is temporary. You write the check and it's over. This monitor arrangement, well, it stays until the court says it can go. Could be months, could be years, nobody knows for sure. But here's where it gets really complicated, and this is what keeps me up at night thinking about it. When the owner of that company is a current or former president, the implications grow larger, much larger, because now we're not just talking about one business and its governance structure. We're talking about potential conflicts of interest that sprawl across the landscape. Suddenly, the boundary between private enterprise and public duty becomes blurred. And when those two worlds overlap under legal supervision, it forces a question few want to answer aloud. Where does business stop and governance begin? Think about it this way. Let's say Trump is president or becomes president again, depending on when you're hearing this. And he's still got business interests, and those business interests are under court supervision. Now he's got to make decisions about policy, about regulations, about court appointments, about the Justice Department, and at the same time, his business is under a monitor appointed by a court in New York. How do those things not collide? How do you separate what's good for the country from what's good for the business, from what keeps the monitor happy? Where are the walls? Who's watching to make sure those lines don't get crossed? I've always believed in bright lines, clear rules. You know where the boundaries are, and you stay on the right side of them. But when you've got a president with an active business that's under court supervision, those lines get fuzzy, real fuzzy. And that's dangerous, not just for the individuals involved, but for the institutions, for the public trust, for the whole system. This isn't about politics, by the way. I'm not making a political argument here. I'm making a governance argument, and I'm making a structural argument. If this were anyone else, any other business owner, any other politician, the same questions would apply. Maybe they wouldn't get as much attention, but they'd be just as valid, because at the end of the day, we've built a system that tries to separate economic power from political power. We want business leaders to run businesses, and we want political leaders to serve the public. And when those two roles get tangled up in the same person, especially under court supervision, well, that's when things get messy. And messy, in my experience, is expensive. Not always in dollars, though it can be that too. But in trust, in clarity, in the ability to know what the rules are and who's following them. And once you lose that clarity, once people start to wonder whether the game is rigged or who's really calling the shots, that's when the whole foundation starts to feel shaky. So yeah, the fine got thrown out. That's good news for Trump's bank account, no question. But the control structure stayed, the monitor stayed, the uncertainty stayed. And in some ways, that's the bigger story, because money you can always make back, but control, once you lose it, that's a lot harder to get back, a whole lot harder. Markets live on confidence. I've said that for years, and I'll keep saying it because it's true. Prices move not only on earnings or forecasts, but on faith that the rules are fair and consistently applied. You can have the best product in the world, the strongest balance sheet, the smartest management team, but if people don't trust the system those things operate in, if they think the game might be rigged or the rules might change tomorrow, well, prices reflect that doubt real quick. And when a business connected to public office comes under court oversight, that faith starts to tremble. Not collapse necessarily, not right away, but tremble. Like when you're walking across a bridge and you feel it sway just a little bit under your feet. You might keep walking, but you're more careful now. You're watching where you step. Investors begin to wonder how far accountability can reach and what it means for everyone else. And that's the thing about precedent. It spreads, it ripples. What happens in one case, especially a high-profile case like this, becomes a reference point, a marker. People start asking, well, if they could do that there, could they do it here? Could they do it to me? In a sitting or former president's company can be told what it may or may not do. What happens when politics and law start overlapping with markets more broadly? Do we start seeing more political figures, businesses coming under scrutiny? Do we start seeing courts inserting themselves into private enterprise more often? Where's the line and who decides where it is? These aren't idle questions. These are the kind of questions that keep capital on the sidelines, because when you're sitting on, say, $0 million, and you're trying to figure out where to deploy it, uncertainty is your enemy. You want to know the rules. You want to know they'll be the same tomorrow as they are today. And when you see a case like this where the rules seem to be well evolving in real time, you get cautious. Maybe you wait. Maybe you look elsewhere. You see, the appeals court's decision removed the heavy fine, but it left the monitor in place. And let me tell you, that was not a signal of forgiveness, not even close. It was a statement of doubt. The court essentially said, we still don't fully trust you to operate unsupervised. That's significant. That's not you made a mistake and you've learned your lesson. That's we need eyes on you indefinitely. Now, put yourself in an investor's shoes for a minute. Imagine buying stock in a company, then discovering its CEO can't make major decisions without approval from an external watchdog. Even if the balance sheet looks fine, and maybe it does, maybe the numbers are solid, your perception of risk changes immediately, doesn't it? Because you start thinking, well, what if there's a great opportunity and the monitor says no? What if there's a crisis and decisions need to be made fast, but there's this approval process that slows everything down? Those possibilities, even if they never happen, they affect how you value the business. They affect what you're willing to pay. They affect whether you want to be involved at all. And that discount, that uncertainty discount, it can be steep. I've seen companies trade at 50, 60, 70% discounts to what they'd be worth in a normal situation just because there's a cloud hanging over them. Legal uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty, governance uncertainty, it all adds up, and it all costs. This case isn't just about one person's empire as much as the headlines might make it seem that way. It's about how modern markets depend on predictability and what happens when predictability is replaced with legal uncertainty. See, markets can handle a lot. They can handle recessions, inflation, natural disasters, all kinds of shocks. What they struggle with is not knowing what the rules are or whether those rules might change without warning. For regulators, this case marks accountability. It says we're watching, we're serious, and we'll intervene when we think the line has been crossed. That's their job. And I get it. Somebody has to be the referee. Somebody has to blow the whistle when things go off the rails. For investors, though it whispers caution, it says, be careful. Things are more complicated here than they might appear. There are layers of oversight, layers of risk that aren't obvious from just looking at the financials. And that whisper, it gets louder the longer this drags on. The longer the monitor stays in place, the more people start to wonder what else might be lurking beneath the surface. And between those two forces, accountability on one side, caution on the other, lies the fragile balance of trust. That's what we're really talking about here. Not just this one case, but the broader question of whether the system works, whether it's fair, whether you can believe what you're told. Because if you can't trust the financials a company puts out, what can you trust? If you can't believe that the rules apply to everyone the same way, why would you put your money at risk? Trust is the oil that keeps the whole machine running. And when it starts to run low, things get rough. They grind. They slow down. Sometimes they seize up entirely. What makes this moment so unusual is not the size of the case, though it's certainly big, but what it represents. Because here's the thing. This same individual now faces legal exposure on several fronts. It's not just New York. There's a state-level RICO case in Georgia. There are ongoing federal investigations, each one with its own timeline, its own court, its own set of prosecutors and judges, and potential outcome. Each on its own would be a heavy burden. I mean, think about it. One major legal case can consume you. It takes time, energy, money, focus. Your lawyers are calling you constantly. You're reviewing documents. sitting for depositions, strategizing about motions and appeals. It's exhausting, even if you're wealthy, even if you've got the best legal team money can buy. But together, multiple cases across multiple jurisdictions, all happening at the same time, they create an overlapping strain that spreads across courts, markets, and institutions. It's like trying to juggle while walking a tightrope while solving a Rubik's Cube. Maybe somebody can do it, but it's not easy, and it's definitely not stable. And here's what worries me, and should worry anyone paying attention. When you've got someone in this position managing a monitored business operation in New York while also defending against criminal charges in Georgia, while also navigating federal investigations, where's the bandwidth? Where's the focus? How do you make sound business decisions when part of your brain is always thinking about the next court date, the next filing deadline, the next headline? You can't, not really, something suffers. Either the business suffers because you're distracted, or the legal defense suffers because you're trying to keep the business running, or more likely both suffer a little bit. And that uncertainty, that divided attention, it shows up in performance. It shows up in missed opportunities. It shows up in decisions that maybe aren't as sharp as they could be. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying this to pile on. I'm not saying it to make a political point. I'm saying it because it's true and it matters. When someone is stretched this thin across this many fronts with this much at stake, the risk compounds. It multiplies, and that affects everyone connected to them. Employees, business partners, lenders, even the political system, if they're still involved in public life. Think about the ripple effects. You've got employees at the Trump organization wondering if the company they work for is stable, if their jobs are secure, if they should be updating their resumes. You've got lenders wondering if the loans they made are solid, if the collateral is what they thought it was, if they need to start having uncomfortable conversations with their risk committees. You've got business partners wondering if deals are going to close, if approvals are going to come through, if they should have backup plans. You've got investors, if there are any public investors involved, wondering what this all means for valuations, for returns, for whether they should cut their losses and move on. And if this person is also involved in politics, either currently or potentially in the future, well, then you've got a whole different set of questions about conflicts of interest, about divided loyalties, about whether someone in this position can effectively serve the public while managing all these private challenges. I've always believed that simplicity is a virtue in business. You want clean structures, clear lines of authority, straightforward incentives. You don't want complexity, because complexity breeds problems. It creates opportunities for things to go wrong, for wires to get crossed, for mistakes to happen. In this situation, it's about as complex as it gets. Multiple legal cases, a monitored business, political ambitions or responsibilities, all tangled together in a way that makes it almost impossible to separate where one ends and another begins. That's not a recipe for success. That's a recipe for stress, for mistakes, for things falling through the cracks. And in markets, when things fall through the cracks, somebody pays. Maybe it's shareholders, maybe it's creditors, maybe it's employees, but somebody pays. So when I look at this whole situation, the fraud finding that stood, the monitor that stayed, the other legal cases piling up, the political dimension adding another layer of complexity, I don't see a story with a clean ending. I see a tangled web that's going to take years to unwind, if it ever fully does. And in the meantime, everyone connected to it lives with uncertainty. They live with risks they can't fully quantify. They live with questions they can't fully answer. And that, my friends, is expensive, very expensive. From an investor's view, the problem is predictability. And, predictability might not sound exciting. It doesn't have the flash of a hot stock tip or the thrill of a big acquisition. But let me tell you, it's worth its weight in gold when legal, political, and financial systems collide. That predictability premium starts to fade. And when it fades, everything gets more expensive. Your cost of capital goes up. Your risk premium goes up. The discount rate you apply to future earnings, it all goes up. In my lifetime, I've been around a while now, I've seen companies survive scandal. I've seen them divorce management, bring in new leadership, clean house. I've seen them weather public crises, everything from product recalls to environmental disasters to fraud investigations. Some of them came through it stronger, some didn't make it, but most of them, if they had solid fundamentals and they acted decisively, they could rebuild trust over time. But I've rarely seen the business of a head of state placed under court-appointed oversight. I mean, really think about that for a second. A current or former president running a business, and that business is under supervision by a court-appointed monitor. That's extraordinary. It's a sign of how deeply governance, law, and commerce have begun to intertwine. And honestly, that should make every long-term investor stop and rethink their assumptions about how these systems interact, because we've traditionally operated under this idea that business is business and politics is politics. And yeah, they influence each other, but they're separate spheres. You've got your private sector over here, your public sector over there, and there are walls between them. But what happens when those walls start to break down? What happens when you can't tell where one ends and the other begins? That's when things get unpredictable. That's when the old playbooks stop working. The lessons here are simple but serious. And I want to emphasize both of those words, simple and serious, because sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that sound obvious until you ignore them and learn the hard way. This company remains under oversight. That's fact number one. It's not speculation. It's not maybe. The monitor is there. The restrictions are in place, and they're not going anywhere until the court says so. Could be this year, could be next year, could be longer. Nobody knows. And that uncertainty, well, that's the point, isn't it? You're investing in a situation where a key variable, managerial autonomy, is undefined. Governance risk is high. That's fact. Number two, when you've got external oversight, when management can't act freely, when there are questions about who's really in control, that's governance risk. And it's the kind that doesn't show up on a balance sheet. You won't find it in the 10K or the annual report, but it's real and it matters maybe more than anything else. Leadership credibility has weakened. Now, I know some people will bristle at that statement. They'll say, Warren, you're being too harsh. Or Warren, you're being political, but I'm not. I'm just calling it like I see it. When a court finds persistent fraud, when it keeps oversight in place, even after reducing the penalty, that sends a signal, fair or unfair, right or wrong. The market hears that signal. And credibility, once damaged, takes a long time to rebuild. Sometimes it never comes back fully. And uncertainty is spreading. That's the fourth piece. It's not contained anymore. It's not just about New York or just about one case. It's spreading across multiple jurisdictions, multiple legal theories, multiple timelines, and with each new development, with each new headline, the uncertainty compounds. It multiplies, gets harder to model, harder to predict, harder to price. When you invest, you got to remember three things. And I've been saying this for decades, so if you've heard it before, well, sometimes things are worth repeating. Fundamentals, governance, and valuation. Those are your three pillars. If any one of them is shaky, you better have a really good reason for why you're putting money at risk. Fundamentals are what the business does, how it makes money, whether it's got a competitive advantage. That's the starting point. Without solid fundamentals, nothing else matters. Governance is who runs it, how decisions get made, whether you can trust the people in charge. And this is where a lot of investors get lazy. They look at the numbers, they get excited about the story, and they skip right. Past governance, big mistake. Huge valuation is what you pay relative to what you get. You can find a great business with great governance, but if you pay too much, you're still going to lose money. Price matters, always has, always will. But here's the thing. If governance falters, even good businesses lose value. I've seen it happen over and over. You've got a company with great products, great market position, maybe even great earnings, but the governance is a mess. The board isn't doing its job. Management is playing games with the numbers. There are conflicts of interest nobody's talking about, and gradually then suddenly the value evaporates. Never buy a wonderful business if you can't trust the people running it. Never. I don't care how good the brand is. I don't care how strong the balance sheet looks. I don't care how exciting the growth prospects are. If you can't trust management, walk away, because they will find a way to disappoint you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Never ignore structure because you like the story. Oh boy, this one gets people in trouble all the time. They fall in love with the narrative, the visionary founder, the disruptive technology, the bold expansion plan, and they convince themselves that the messy governance stuff doesn't matter. It'll get cleaned up later. They tell themselves once they prove the concept, they'll fix the structure. No, they won't. Bad structure doesn't fix itself. It gets worse. It metastasizes. And by the time you realize how bad it is, your investment is underwater. When courts must enforce discipline, you are no longer buying growth, you're buying risk. Think about what that means. The market is supposed to enforce discipline through competition, through customer choice, through investor scrutiny. That's healthy discipline. That's the kind that makes companies stronger. But when courts have to step in, when judges have to appoint monitors, when legal proceedings are the only thing keeping management in check, that's a different story. That's forced discipline. And forced discipline usually means the voluntary kind failed, which means management either couldn't or wouldn't police itself. Either way, that's a red flag the size of Texas. Before you invest in this situation or any other, ask yourself some basic questions. Who controls decisions? Really controls them, not who's supposed to control them. Who signs off on money? Who has veto power? What limits exist, formal or informal? Are there restrictions you don't see in the public filings? Are there side agreements, court orders, oversight arrangements that affect how the business operates? These questions sound simple, but people skip them. They get caught up in the excitement, the momentum, the fear of missing out, and they forget to ask the boring fundamental questions about control and authority. Because in business, even a strong balance sheet cannot protect you from bad governance. You can have $1 billion in cash, zero debt, profitable operations, and still get wiped out if the people in charge make bad decisions or worse, dishonest decisions. Assets are only as valuable as the integrity of the people managing them. Markets will continue to rise and fall for many reasons: greed, fear, innovation, arrogance, all the usual suspects. Human nature hasn't changed in the thousands of years we've been keeping records, and it's not going to change now. People will get too optimistic and bid things up too high. Then they'll get too pessimistic and sell things too cheap. That cycle will continue as long as markets exist. But underneath it all, the system only works when trust and fundamentals move together. When trust breaks down, when people stop believing that the numbers are real, that the rules are fair, that the people in charge are acting in good faith, then fundamentals don't matter anymore because nobody wants to play a game they think is rigged. This ruling was not just about one man or one company. I know that's how it looks. I know the headlines make it personal, but step back and look at the bigger picture. It was about the line between power and accountability. It was about whether the rules apply to everyone or just to some people. It was about whether our institutions can hold when they're tested by someone with money, influence, and political power. And the answer, at least so far, is sort of, the courts didn't back down completely, but they did blink a little. The fraud findings stuck, but the penalty got reduced. The monitor stayed. But we'll see how long and how effective that oversight really is. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's probably not over. So what do you do with all this information? How do you think about it as an investor or just as someone trying to make sense of the world? Stay calm, don't panic, don't overreact. Markets will be here tomorrow and next year and 20 years from now. Individual situations come and go, but the game continues. Stay rational. Don't let emotion, whether it's political emotion or investment emotion, cloud your judgment. Look at the facts. Ask the hard questions. Don't believe something just because you want it to be true. And remember the first rule: don't lose money. That's it. That's the whole thing. Protect your capital. Don't take unnecessary risks. Don't convince yourself that this time is different or that you're smarter than everyone else or that the rules don't apply to you. The second rule is just as important. Don't forget the first, because in the heat of the moment when everyone around you is making money and you feel like you're missing out, that's when you forget. That's when you take the stupid risk, make the emotional decision, ignore the warning signs, protect capital, respect governance, and never confuse control with strength. Just because someone looks powerful doesn't mean they're in control. Just because they project confidence doesn't mean they're making good decisions. Sometimes the strongest position is admitting what you don't know and walking away from situations you can't understand or trust. If you found this enlightening, give this channel a hand by liking and subscribing, because we need more people thinking carefully about these issues, asking tough questions, and not settling for easy answers. The more folks who understand how markets really work, how governance really matters, how trust really underpins everything, the better off we'll all be. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next